Today, my friend Tyler and some of our friends from the Cross Conference are here to chat with us about a significant frontier for the gospel and for the church in the years to come. Let's welcome them to the stage.
Well, good morning, IndyCC. It's good to be back with you today. My name is Tyler, and I'm joined here with two new friends for me, Matt and Isaac, who both work at the Cross Conference, who we've joined with this year, and they're also both pastors in Washington, D.C., and so we're so happy to have you with us. I know you've been emceeing the Cross Conference. How are things going over there for y'all?
That's right, man. They're going really well. We are really excited to have you guys. We've been about 2 days in, and I just want to say quickly, we are thrilled that you guys are coming to join us. Thank you. One person clapping. Yeah. Thank you.
This section over here is happy.
Right here.
Yeah.
I'll talk to this section. Just let me say briefly what Cross is. Cross is a missions conference for students like y'all. We believe that God has used students mightily for world evangelization and world missions, and he'll continue to do so. So just a couple of things. We open at 8 a.m. The bookstore, the exhibitors, they'll be open, so come on over. We'd love to see you then. We'll have some gifts for you too. My man mentioned JD is going to be there and David Platt as well. So we are really excited to have you guys.
Well, we can't wait to join. There's so much that we're looking forward to learning from you tomorrow. But right now, there's some things we want to learn from you today. In the next few moments, I mentioned already, they're both pastors in Washington, D.C. What's actually kind of interesting, so Matt and Isaac, Matt works in a church that's predominantly African American, and we'll hear more about this, and Isaac is in a church that's predominantly white, and so we're going to have a really open and honest conversation for the next few minutes about race in America. And just so you hear this from us, IndyCC, this is a conversation that we think is incredibly important for gospel people to be having. And so that's why we're taking time at this point. So we're asking you all, lean in. We're asking you to be honest and open. We're excited to learn, and we want to engage this important conversation at this moment, right? I did hear one clap when you said this is important. Are you all ready and interested to hear what they have to say? We do think this is vital work. And so Matt, I'd like to start with you. I know that you recently working in the church there, and this is a newer thing to you. You recently relocated, moved your family, changed jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey you've been on and where kind of God's leading you, particularly as it relates to this kind of race in America conversation?
Well, I don't think I am about racial reconciliation. That's not what racial reconciliation is just a huge topic, and I'm not smart enough to get my arms around that. So we moved into the city back in the early 90s in a part of the city, Capitol Hill, that was not desirable at the time, into a broken down church. And in God's providence over the next 20 years, he rebuilt that church to be a big, strong, gospel preaching church. At the same time, gentrification hit that part of the city. So it became very affluent and increasingly white. It was really easy to sit in that area and look at the poorer parts of the city and kind of look down your nose at them. So the city of Washington basically has two edges, the Potomac River, where you probably know about the Potomac River, where Kennedy Center and the White House is. There's another river that nobody ever really talks about, the Anacostia River. And on the east side of the Anacostia River is the poor part of D.C., and it's predominantly African American. So for years, I'd pick up the Washington Post, and I'd look at the failing social ills of that part of the city. What changed for me was just 5 years ago, my daughter is an art teacher, and she had prayed that the Lord would send her kind of on a mission into one of these schools where she could be a faithful teacher, a gospel witness among students who don't hear much. So she got the only art job at Anacostia High School. 900 African American students, a graduation rate of not 99% or 89%, 79%, not 69%, not 49%. Their goal, which they haven't even hit yet, is a graduation rate of 39%. This September started by one of her students shooting and killing another one of her students. What hit me was, it wasn't about racial reconciliation. I was convicted when I look at Luke 10 and the story of the Good Samaritan, and I realized those people, I used to think they just need to get their act together. Those people are my neighbors. And I, for 20 years, have essentially been walking by them, like the religious man in that story of Luke 10, walking by the man who's in the gutter. And it was the Samaritan, the non-religious guy, who helped him. And I said, we got to do something. So we started Bible studies in the high school, and that was really weird for me because I'm this old white guy, and I'm surrounded by these young, hip. I'm hip, right, Isaac? Am I hip? Come on, come on.
Come on. You hip,
And
Matt.
yet they were listening, and we started to see some conversions. And then my brother Thabiti Onyebuile said, we're coming back to the States. We want to plant a church in Anacostia. I was like, let's go.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate hearing that story. That concept, I don't know if you all heard it and got it, that move from all about reconciliation to neighborly love. I mean, that is such a good driving force in this interaction.
So Jesus had some wisdom when he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and what? Your neighbor as yourself. There was wisdom there because it's really easy to think, oh, I love unreached people and I love, this. Okay. Go actually try to care for your neighbor and get to know your neighbor and love that neighbor, especially if he or she doesn't look like you. That's a bit of a challenge, and God had wisdom in that call.
Yeah, amen. Well, Isaac, can you tell us a little bit about your story and your journey?
Yeah, I want to talk about two things in the story, shame and discipleship. So shame, kind of coming into the race conversation, as an African American, I came into the race conversation very early, and the world essentially told me that I was black. And I remember it was 5th grade, and we were all friends. I went to a pretty diverse elementary school. We were all friends. And then I remember it was the Bush and the Gore election, and people were picking sides. I'm like, 5th graders were picking sides, is what I'm talking about. And it quickly became a race thing. And I'm not sure why this revolves around presidential elections, because I think we can all agree 2016 has been a rough year around the election with race. Right, right, yeah, it's your fault, Tyler. But I remember discovering quickly then and feeling bad. I was kind of in the middle. I was too white for the black kids and too black for the white kids, and being like, this is a real issue. And I just want to say quickly, I think Satan uses shame in this conversation more than any conversation that I can really think of. And shame builds resentment and defensiveness, which is why I think people are here even hear that phrase we've been using, racial reconciliation. They're just there's a rolling of the eyes, just please, didn't that already happen? Can't we get over it? And that I think, compounds itself later on till we get to later stages in life. And it becomes an issue that racial reconciliation or reconciliation in general, that we divorce from our discipleship. So I would say this statement. I think the American Evangelical Church, and frankly, the white American Evangelical Church, churches that are made up predominantly white people, though I would say many black churches too, this is the issue they are least discipled on. And that's a big problem because Galatians 6:2 commands us to bear one another's burdens, like what Matt is talking about, to help our neighbors. And if I'm going to bring a burden to you as having a struggle in this world because of my race, and Matt's not even convinced my struggle is legitimate, and he's talking to me and saying, hey, why don't you got to prove your burden to me before I'm even going to help you lift it. Well, that makes it really, really, really tough. It makes me not want to share. It makes me not want to talk. And we share Christ, but we can't share the hardest things in our life. So in that sense, that's what I've seen in a predominantly white church that I serve in, is that really there almost feels like this additional hurdle. You're, in a sense, making burdens heavier for people by saying, yeah, you got to prove to me that that's a legitimate issue before I come over there and help you with it.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that. We're a movement, we're an organization crew that would say we're a lot about evangelism and discipleship. And so even your challenge that this can be a part of discipleship, I hope that's maybe spawning some new thinking in folks' minds even now. And along those lines, Matt, just curious, I think there's often, you mentioned shame being a bit impediment. I think fear can sometimes limit folks in their willingness to enter into this kind of work. So there's, yes, I love my neighbor, I want to love my neighbor, but I'm afraid of creating offense. and I'm afraid of doing something wrongly or making a misstep. What are some ways that folks can maybe work through that fear? What are good first steps that people can take when it comes to this kind of neighborly love, reconciling work rooted in the gospel?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, with the reason they're afraid is because there's shame with offense. If you mess up, if Matt touches my hair and I'm like, don't ever touch me, like, there's an issue, and you don't want to be ashamed. And I think confidently what that means, a good first step, is really building relationships. I mean, on a personal level, Matt has been so encouraged by him at how he's built relationships, so that gives us capital for him to spend to ask some what might be insensitive question or whatever. And also for me, it's not just on him, but for me, I have to trust the gospel enough because I know as an African American, I'm just as sinful as he is, maybe more. And I need the gospel just as badly, and if God has forgiven me, how can I look over here and create some law that is somehow the unforgivable sin? I mean, racism, I think, in some senses in this context, has become the unforgivable sin. So I'll ignore Matt's whatever he does, but I can't forgive him for that, and I see that as ungospel-like.
So two of my best friends is Isaac and Trip Lee, who I think you had here last night.
We did.
And Trip and I had lunch yesterday.
Tell him what we call ourselves. We call ourselves Max Black Sheep.
And their best friend is just married, who's an African American, just married my eldest daughter. So I was like, I need to get my black card soon. I mean,
Here it is.
They haven't given it to me yet. But these guys, as I have conversation with them, I was like, when you grow up in the majority world and you're part of the majority world, you don't have to think. You set the rules, right?
Yep.
You don't have to think. Now I have to think. I'm a minority in my neighborhood. I'm a minority in my church. And I have to think through conversations. I even have to think through, like, I'll see these guys, I come into church, like, there's like 10% of us are non-black. And I see these guys, they're doing all this what do you even call it, like dabbing up and, this kind of stuff. And I get in there and I'm like, I can't even do that right, Stop, like, hello. I even have to think through how I'm going to shake hands and greet people, and I've learned more. Yeah, I've just learned so much. But part of that learning is I just got to close my mouth, and as if I were in Istanbul, I have to language learn.
Yeah.
And I have to be willing to be quiet and listen, and these guys have to be willing to take my questions and sort through, and just have this conversation. But I'm telling you, it's been like having a touch of vertigo. Not like vertigo, like the first time I went to Mumbai and I like, oh my gosh, this place is nuts. Yeah. But I'm like, wait, I'm only 3 miles from our old church. And it feels like a different world and different experience. And I suddenly understand what my black brothers and sisters were going through in my old church when they talk about being uncomfortable or not quite fitting in.
Because you were the minority.
Because I'm the minority now. And the music doesn't flow, and time doesn't flow, and organization doesn't flow. It doesn't flow the same way. Yeah. And honestly, it's not even, my wife and I have found, it's not a color of our skin so much as it's, our middle class sensibilities are sometimes like, what are you doing? You're like, well, you shouldn't be doing that. But that's not their experience, in that neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a little bit, I know, the three of us, about kind of helpful next steps, ways to expand our imagination and our thinking in this area. Are there any books, talks, things that have been helpful to you kind of as you've made this journey, things that folks could maybe pick up with that Amazon gift card y'all got for Christmas? I'm just curious, like what kind of stuff?
Y'all gave out gift cards?
Oh, I'm just assuming some folks. Did anyone else get an Amazon gift card for Christmas? Don't
guess,
right there. Some nerds in the front. Yeah, but what are some good next steps towards thinking, though, helping us get our minds around what is such a complex reality? Like you said, navigating these cultures. What are some good ways we could venture into that thinking a little more?
Sure. I think Matt made a good point that race is not a singular issue. it's kind of like Velcro. A lot of things stick to it. So class, culture, language, I mean, all of these things stick to race. And I had a good saying that, I mean, racism is kind of that word that makes us all bristle, and no one wants to be a racist, right? Shame. But before we deal with racism, we actually need to deal with race. You know, if you were honest with yourself, could you even define, like, what is race? And it is a very real thing. Is it a social construct? Is it actually the color of my skin? What is it? And there are books that'll help you. I think a great one is Divided by Faith, which talks about this issue in the church. I think that's probably my go-to one on that. And if I can be so self-serving to say, I've written a couple of things about this too. I've written an article called Why Churches Are Hard for Black People. I've also written one that's called Don't Be Colorblind, and those are on a ministry called 9marks.org, 9marks.org, and you can read those if you would like.
Well, here's what I can promise you, just because I have the passwords to IndyCC's Facebook. Would you all like if I post the things? Because I've read some Isaacs. So can I post that for all? Okay, I'll do that. Matt, I know you had something else to say.
I like the book entitled The Art of Neighboring. It doesn't particularly take on the issue of race, but I wonder if you guys are in dorms, how much do you really know about everybody on your dorm floor, in your apartment complex? I mean, apart from she wears Sperry's or he wears whatever, you know, like. I mean, really know who your neighbor is. Think about, you know, the neighborhood you grew up in the house, and think about the 8 houses that surround you. Apart from the guy who mows his lawn on Sundays and drives a red car, do you know enough about your neighbor to say, I love them? And do you love them enough that you're going to serve them? And through that, then, you get the opportunity to speak the gospel into their lives. That's a real challenge to us, especially if we're the oddballs in our neighborhoods, to just kind of get in there. The Art of Neighboring is a great read.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And the last one I would say
yes.
is the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
The Bible, God's supreme authority, talks about, it's not silent on these matters. It's not, I mean, what does it mean to be made in the image of God, and everyone is made in God's image? What does it mean that we fell from that image? What does it mean, you know, you can just trace this out. What does it mean, ethnicity? Why did the Egyptians hate the Israelites? You know, this is not a singularly white and black issue in America. So the Bible has much to say too.
Yeah.
We really look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Come early, 8 o'clock. We start at 9, okay? So come early, grab a seat, check out the bookstore, whatever you want. We'd love to serve you.
Yeah. Can we thank them once again for all the wisdom they've shared with us? Thank you so much. That's
See you guys.